Okay, if we could ask everyone to take their seats, we'll be starting in about 1 minute. Thank you. Volume. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are ready to begin. We'd like to start our evening with a Pledge of Allegiance. So if you'd all stand, Casey Tomerlin, the president of the Yavapai County Farm Bureau, will be leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. Democracy is the governance by the people or by their elected representatives. As Americans, we have the right and responsibility to vote and to be informed in that vote. Thank you for coming this evening and being a part of this great process in Arizona and for our governor position. We have with us this evening 3 of our candidates, and they'll get to introduce themselves, so I won't take time in that. But I would like to recognize the Yavapai County Farm Bureau and the Arizona Farm Bureau for putting on this function this evening, as well as the town of Cottonwood and the Cottonwood Chamber of Commerce for participating in that, and we appreciate the location as well as our refreshments for after the event. The Arizona Farm Bureau is made up of farms and ranches of all shapes and sizes in Yavapai County, in Arizona, and throughout the United States of America. We focus on agricultural education and promotion, legislative outreach, farm safety and education, agricultural learning, and networking opportunities. I'm a proud member of the Yavapai County Farm Bureau, have been for 15 years, and happy to be, and glad to be here with you this evening. My name is Charla Mortimer. I own Mortimer Family Farms with my husband and 4 children, and we also have a landscape and nursery business in Prescott. I also currently serve as the State Women's Committee Chair for the Arizona Farm Bureau, and I'm happy to be involved in that organization as well. So with that, we'd like to go ahead. We're going to couple just housekeeping things. We have some cards here for questions for many of the audience. So if you raise your hand if you have a question, we'll bring you the card. You can write your questions, and then we'll collect those, and those will be asked by me from right here at the pulpit. We also have an announcement. Al Melvin was set to come, but got called into the Senate to work on the state budget, so he was not able to participate as a last-minute thing. About 2 o'clock this afternoon, he had to call in. So we appreciate his trying to be here and his working on the state budget. We also would like to thank the Verde Valley TV station. They are here, and they are recording this evening's forum, and they'll be broadcasting it for 3 times, and then it'll actually be on a YouTube event as well. So we'll pass that on, and we'd love for you to share that with your friends and family and get other people to watch this forum via internet and television. Well, I think with that, we'll just give you a little bit of our rules. What we've invited all of our candidates to do is take 3 minutes to do an opening statement. We have a timer on the front row, so they'll be watching our timer, and she'll tell them when to whoa and when to go. And then then we'll go through some questions, and they'll each have 1 minute to answer the question, and then 30-second rebuttal if they have something to add to something that has been said. So with that, if there's any questions, everybody good? We will begin. Mr. Smith, would you like to begin with your opening statement, please?
I would be more than happy to begin with my opening statement, and thank you so very much for inviting us here to God's country. Yes, that was political pandering, but I'll just admit it, but it was also true, wasn't it? Yeah. A couple things I'd like, and the reason I know it's God's country is Cottonwood actually saved me for about 6 months, but not here. I was actually serving a church mission in Bolivia, and I served in a place that was called Tarija, down near the Argentine border, and it was high desert. And the interesting thing about Tarija, it was a high desert. Oh man, it looked just like Arizona. And right through the middle of Tarija ran a lazy river lined with cottonwoods. And to get to Tarija, you got to go over a very tall mountain that you drove over, and it took you down into the city. And I'm going, my gosh, this is Cottonwood's twin sister. So while I was in Bolivia getting very homesick, Cottonwood both saved me and also made me more homesick, because I said, this is like just being home. I'm a 4th-generation Arizonan. Currently the mayor of Mesa, but a 4th-generation Arizonan. My family has roots in the Gila Valley, Safford and Thatcher, of where I went to a lot of meetings like the Farm Bureau, because my grandfather was a farmer and a cattle rancher. I had both. Farmed a lot of cotton and a lot of alfalfa to feed his milk cows and his other cattle. And so I grew up, and I tell you, as a young kid, it was very interesting to see a grandfather on his knees pleading with his Heavenly Father for rain. And as a kid, you don't really understand what's going on, but you knew that there was one thing that was so important to him, and that was rain. And then the day that late thunderstorm came through, and then you saw your grandfather sort of with a tear in his eye because, well, there was too much rain. And that rain included little ice balls called hail. And as he's looking out over his cotton field, to have him explain to me how hail and cotton balls really didn't go together very well. Since that time, I've really appreciated the agriculture part of Arizona, and the fact that we are based, really our roots in this society is in agriculture. Growing up in Tucson and then coming to Mesa, where I lived with my family, my wife of 36 years, my 3 kids and 5 grandkids, I've seen certainly the East Valley of Mesa and Gilbert and Chandler move from a primarily agriculture to an urban community. Some people call that progress. We look at that as being, sort of unfortunate. And so, as we see the challenges of rural, urban, big city, small town, these are things that this next governor will have to deal with, because there are some very incredible issues as it relates to water, as it relates to land plan, other things that we need to address.
Thank you. Ms. Jones, would you like to take your turn?
Thanks. And thanks for being here, and thanks for putting this together. We have traveled around the state and done many of these forums, and it's always a pleasure to be in front of voters, looking them in the eyes and hearing their hearts and what's in their minds. I'm Christine Jones, and I am a Republican candidate for governor. And I learned something from talking with my friends at the Farm Bureau last week that I didn't know, because unlike Mayor Smith, I didn't grow up on a farm or around a farm. I actually grew up in the city. And I learned for the first time that cotton is a fruit. I know, that was my reaction. And then I thought they were pulling my leg. I thought they were like, oh, she's a city girl, she won't know the difference. But it grows on a vine, and it's got a flower, and it's got seeds, and I thought, I'll be darned, it actually is a fruit. It doesn't taste very good, though. So, when Arizona was seeking status as a state, the Constitutional Convention was started each day with a prayer. And my favorite prayer came on day 2, when the chaplain, the Reverend Seaborn Crutchfield, prayed, "We pray thee, O Lord, that this body of men, the representatives of the people of Arizona, would adopt such a constitution as would be acceptable to every citizen, and that it would grant unto Arizona statehood, and place her among the grand galaxy of states in these United States, and that Arizona would be the brightest star in the Union." And I read that and I thought, it's amazing that a prayer from 1910 would sum up why I'm running for governor in 2014. My husband, who's here tonight with me, is a career military officer, and we moved around as a family for a long time, and then in the 90s we came here, and when we got here we knew we'd found home. We fell in love with this place, and when you love something, you want it to thrive, and you want it to flourish, and you want it to prosper. I'm running for governor because I see that Arizona can be the brightest star in the Union, and I have a plan to make it so. I look forward to talking more about that tonight on the substantive issues, but simply put, I am an unapologetic conservative. I am a fierce defender of the Constitution, and I spent a career of 25 years in the private sector establishing a life of credibility and experience that have prepared me uniquely to sit here today. I'm a CPA and a lawyer and a forensic accountant and lots of other things with lots of letters behind my name that I look forward to talking to. But most importantly, I am a candidate that comes to this with no strings attached. I've never been in office before. I've never taken a paycheck from the state. I simply do this because sometimes in your life, you have to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. I'm Christine Jones. Thank you so much for having me here. I very much look forward to talking to you more about the issues tonight.
Mr. Bennett.
Can we stand?
Yes, please.
All righty.
However you're comfortable.
Uh-oh. I don't think we're going to stand.
Maybe not. We got you on a tight
good.
leash.
No problem.
We can fix it, though. Now you can stand. You just can't go very far.
Hi, I'm Ken Bennett, and it's a pleasure to be with you. Scott talks about how this reminded him of home. To me, this is home. I grew up in the Prescott area, but for many years we had business interests over here. When our business started to go down in the Prescott area, my dad had gas stations and delivered fuel and oil. There was a company over here that was for sale. He found out. He bought a very similar business from the Dobbins family. And we ended up with gas stations in Clarkdale and Cottonwood, and one out in Verde Village and Camp Verde. And as a teenage boy, my responsibility every day during the summer when I wasn't in school was to drive over here in a little 2,000-gallon gasoline tanker and go to our bulk plant down by the Tavasi Brothers in Clarkdale and load it up with fuel and drive all over the valley delivering fuel and oil. And so it was a wonderful time of my life. I got to know the Verde Valley and a lot of the families over here. Good to see Chip Davis and Diane, and I've known the Mortimers. It's good to have you here, Charla. Her husband Gary, and when they lived in Prescott, knew them. But I can look around and I can think of all the names of people that we know over here, the Pattersons and the Andersons and the Stewarts and the Grossettas and on and on and on. So it's really home to me. It doesn't remind me of home, it is home. And first and foremost, though, I am a husband and a father. My wife and I have 3 grown children and 2 little grandsons. As I said, I grew up in the Prescott area. Grandma and Grandpa's phone number was 49. And over the years, the phone companies kept adding digits to it. It's now 928-445-2949. But that 49 was the original 49 number that we had there in Prescott. But the Verde Valley was a very important part of our family. In fact, at one point, Mom and Dad almost moved over here because our business here in the Verde Valley had all actually eclipsed what was going on in the Prescott area. But we never did move over here, but it's always been an important part of my life. When I served on the Prescott City Council, we had a lot of working arrangements with the cities over here, all of us being part of Yavapai County. And people ask, why are you running for governor? And we all have our reasons. I blame it on the Boy Scouts. I'm an Eagle Scout, as is Scott, and I think Senator Melvin. And I don't know what day of the week Scott used to go to Scout meetings, but mine was Wednesday night. And we'd raise our hands as Boy Scouts and say a Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful. And that really impacted me. And then there's 9 others: friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. But that helpful was always impactful to me. And as I watched our family businesses help people with jobs, as I ran for other offices that we can maybe get into, I think it's important that you have a governor with experience, and we'll talk about some of that experience today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your introductions. So we'll start this, get going right away. Now, don't forget, if you have a question, raise your hand. We'll bring you one of our cards. We need your questions to make this really matter to you folks. So we have one, Paul, right over here in the aisle in the black jacket. So please submit your questions so we can incorporate them into this evening's program. But I have a few questions that I brought ready to go until we got the audience warmed up for you. Okay. So first of all, we're going to start with Ms. Jones here. We'd like to start. As governor, how will you help rural, natural resource-based communities thrive?
There's a couple of things, and I think the first thing we have to do is stop taking your money away, because the single most common thread that I've heard throughout the whole state from mayors and city councils and county supervisors is stop sweeping our money into the general fund. So that's the first thing, is give you your money back. The second thing really is, I think that it's time for us to have a strong governor in some of these western states who's willing to stand up to the federal government, particularly the agencies that are overburdening the rural communities like the EPA, and to say, you know what, why don't we thoughtfully take a look at what we can do to manage our forests and to really improve economic development and stimulate the local economy, and also to prevent forest fires and to have a healthy forest, and to increase the number of mills in this state from, I think it's down to like 3 active mills now. This notion of getting the federal government off of your back is significant. So give you your money back, get your federal government off your back, and then importantly, we have to say to the people in the legislature, it's time to have leadership there to say we are going to push decision-making back to the place where it makes sense, because you know what's going on in your community way better than any guy sitting in the state capitol looking inwardly, being self-focused and internally driven. That is going to profoundly impact, in my opinion, the ability of the rural communities to navigate forward into the future.
Thank you. Mr. Bennett.
Well, I think Christine hit on some very important subjects. One of them, and kind of encompasses all of that, though, is we just need to remember that rural Arizona exists. And I think it's time to have a governor, frankly, from rural Arizona. And it's been a long time since that happened. And when I served in the legislature, there were only about 7 districts that elected their representatives from rural Arizona. There was about 5 from Tucson, but the majority of the 30 districts came from the Phoenix metropolitan area. And I always took a little bit of, you're never supposed to be prideful, but I appreciated the fact that my colleagues saw in me something that allowed me to be the Senate president of the entire Senate. And it wasn't because I was from rural Arizona, but that put a person in a key position in state government that could look out for rural Arizona. And as Christine mentioned, you know, the state budget has been balanced largely on the backs of our cities and towns and counties for the last 4 or 5 years, and that has got to stop. And when I became a state senator and had that experience from local government in rural Arizona, that's when I put my foot down and said, the state budget is not going to be balanced by stealing your HERF money, your revenue, your highway user revenue money for maintaining your roads out in rural Arizona. And so I think it's time for a governor from rural Arizona, and I humbly offer myself as that person, because it's important to remember that rural Arizona exists.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
You know, here's the reality. It's a mathematical challenge, and this is our challenge in Arizona. Arizona is the most urbanized state, other than second most behind Nevada. You have the great state of Maricopa. You have Metro Tucson. You have the district issues that Ken brought out. The fact of the matter is that people forget not only that rural Arizona exists, but that rural Arizona can thrive if we quit trying to have a one-size-fits-all approach. What we did, you know, and believe it or not, I sort of had a little bit of an issue like this in Mesa, where we were overlooked by Phoenix and by the others. See, we think of Phoenix like you think of Maricopa. You know? It's, and what we did is we looked at ourselves and we said, what do we do well? Because every community does things well. Every community has strengths. And then we tried to maximize or leverage those things we did well so we could decide how we could prosper. Now the problem is that state government all too often decides for you what they want to focus on, which is why those in the great state of Maricopa decide, you know, we'll close down all the state parks. Those aren't really that important to Peoria and Mesa and Glendale and Phoenix, without recognizing that, no, those are the lifeblood of many rural communities. They talk about water, and they say, you know what, we really need to feed this new subdivision. Those farmers up outside of Phoenix, they won't miss it that much, will they? Besides, you know, people are more important than plants, aren't they? I think one of the things you need is somebody who actually understands the greatness of rural Arizona and then helps you to do what you do best. And that'll be different in Cottonwood, be different in Payson, be different in Prescott. But it's important that state government doesn't try to force a one-size-fits-all and take from the outside to bring into the inside, which is their circle of influence and what they know.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any rebuttals or any other additional comments? We have 30 seconds that you're allowed for that. No? Then we'll move to the next question. Our next question regards small business. It is hard to lure new business into your community when you cannot keep your streets in good repair. What would you stop the rating of HERF funds so that they can be used in rural towns for street repair? And Mr. Ken Bennett, we're up to you.
Would I think it's important to realize that the best way to know what somebody will do is what they have done. When I got to the Senate and had that foundation of having started my public service career at a city council and knowing how important those local revenues were, we put an end to the state sweeping those HERF funds and LTAF and all kinds of other types of funds that, if you work in local government, you know, are very critical. And so absolutely, I will stop that from happening. And it's still, amazingly, happening today. You will hear from the governor and the legislature that we're not doing any more sweeps. But that's not the truth. But we will stop that with me as governor, because even when I was just a state senator, and especially when I was president of the Senate, we put an end to those sweeps because I understood from having served at the local level that those are very, very important to local governments and especially rural Arizona. So the answer is yes, I will, because yes, I have done, and we'll do it again.
Mr. Smith.
You'll hear from everybody. Every Republican candidate will tell you that HERF raids have got to stop. Matter of fact, about everyone at the legislature will tell you that HERF raids have got to stop. The governor will tell you HERF raids have got to stop. Then the budget comes through, and guess what? Because that's the reality. I have been mayor for 6 years. The real downfall started literally as I took office. I didn't cause it, by the way. I want to make that perfectly clear. But I was hit with a $62 million shortfall and in Mesa alone. And we saw what the state did. And the reality is that sometimes they live in their world without understanding that the penny-wise, pound-foolish approaches they take and the desire to somehow, we're fixated on doing things on the cheap, without realizing that, number one, as you take these monies, especially HERF, you not only do damage that is really irreparable to the economies of especially our rural and smaller cities and towns, but you also set it up so that the costs that will be paid, and let's make no mistake about it, these costs will be paid. Once you have to fix a road, you have to fix a road, and guess what? Fixing it 2 years from now is going to be much more expensive and much harder than fixing it now. That's the attitude, though. The fix it for today, fix the budget for today, and lay it off on those people that are out of sight, out of mind. And usually, unfortunately, that's disproportionately rural Arizona. I come from a national position of transportation investment. I believe that we have a much bigger problem than HERF, and you talk about LTAF and things like that. Arizona is the only state in the union that provides no state assistance for any kind of transit. Believe it or not, that hurts rural communities many times worse than it does urban communities. All those things will be put into perspective. When we say stop, and she said stop, we want to put things into perspective so that we can look at things not to doing it simply on the cheap, so how we can build a better Arizona. You can't do that taking this money away from rural Arizona.
Ms. Jones.
Yeah, I guess I kind of stole my own thunder with the last answer. So you've heard what I said about that. I really hear the mayors and the local communities, and it is a passion plea to have that money returned. So it's a commitment we should all make, and we should actually do it, Scott, not just say we're going to. So let me try to answer the second part of your question, which is, what do you do about helping the rural communities create jobs? When we came to Arizona, I was at a law firm for 5 years, and then after a little while, I was recruited to go to this little startup company up in Scottsdale with a crazy name, GoDaddy. And over about 11 years of being there, we grew from just a few dozen employees to about 4,000, all while providing technology services to about 12 million small businesses and entrepreneurs all over the world. All that to say, we learned a thing or two about creating jobs and enabling and helping small businesses to become established and to grow. And it's one of the things that we developed a significant expertise in, amassing the largest group of small businesses of any company in the world. It's a significant commitment of mine because as I've traveled around the state, we just celebrated 20,000 miles last week, we have met thousands of incredible, smart, caring, concerned, inventive people. We have to get out of their way and help them to exist and to survive and to thrive, not by handouts, because they don't want that. What they want is the government to get out of their way. That is something we have to do to help the businesses in the small rural communities to survive and to thrive. And oh, by the way, fixing the roads, that would help too.
Thank you. For our next question, we're here in the Verde Valley, so I can't not ask this question because it's specifically about water, and we all know how important water is. What do you see as the water future for Arizona's rural areas? How do we balance water needs between rural and urban areas? Mr. Smith.
I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Challenged. And we're challenged not only in rural Arizona, we're challenged in Arizona. We're in the middle of a drought. I think one of the biggest challenges we have is not only rural versus urban, but urban versus reality. The fact is that since we completed the CAP, there's a much different attitude in both Phoenix and Tucson about the reality of our situation. That doesn't help you, because what happens is that when you're having Colorado River pumped into the middle of the state, it's in many ways the real challenges we have are out of sight, out of mind. Out of sight, out of mind. As governor, believe me, I will bring back water as a truly statewide issue. I'll also connect water to other things. Navajo Generating Station, that was really about water. It wasn't about power. And as I sat down with Gina McCarthy, the EPA administrator, and talked to her about that, I said, you do realize this isn't so much about coal air pollution, it's about water. That's what it is in Arizona. When we talk about forest thinning, at the end of the day, it's very much about safety, but it's also about water. And the thousands, if not millions of acre feet that are being lost because these saplings are sucking up our water that could go into our reservoirs and our aquifers. It's not only smart management, it's smart water management. These things, every decision we make in Arizona needs to be made about not only the balancing of water, but really our overall water supply. And also, I would constantly change the conversation. We have our Indian communities who control more water than anyone in the state, and that's really going to be the issue, is how do we balance their rights, our rights, and really rural versus urban, because the majority of water in this state is still used for agricultural purposes. The threats are real, and the challenges are every day between transferring those from rural agriculture to urban.
Thank you
That
very
is a
much.
problem we have to deal with.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Jones.
Well, one of the things that I am not an expert on is water, so I've done a lot of studying to figure out really what is this tug, this push-pull between urban and rural, and as we navigate forward into the next, say, 50 to 100 years, what are we going to do? What are we going to leave behind for the people that are to come? And it turns out there are several major studies that have been done here in this state, some by really truly top experts in water. One in particular that brought together 1,000 water experts representing all 15 counties, and they've proposed, well, it's about 500 pages. I don't recommend you read it unless you have horrible insomnia, but they have proposed a really thoughtful solution to move forward with water policy in this state. And I really think we have a chance for the first time in a long time to reform water policy in this state so that we can do what the Central Arizona Project did 65 years ago, to say we're going to take risks and we're going to build infrastructure and we're going to strive and achieve and earn and be educated, and we are going to set something in place today that will benefit people 65 years from now. They didn't make that water for them. They didn't drink that water. We drink that water. And today we need to do the same thing to balance the water between the tug of the urban and the rural. Make sure that the 12 aquifers in this state are managed properly, some of which are under private land, some of which are under public land, and some of which are on Indian reservations, and so on and so forth. We can do this if we take politics out of it. If we could not look at it as a profit motive just for a second, we really could get some progress made.
Mr. Bennett.
I think one of the most important things related to water or many other issues between rural and urban Arizona is communication and building relationships. I served on the Prescott City Council, but then when I got elected state senator for all of this area, there were some pretty good fights going on between one side of Mingus Mountain and the other. And I worked very hard to maintain relationships on both sides, because some of the arguments that were being made between Prescott, the Prescott side, and the Verde River side are then used by people like SRP and others to say, well, maybe people are getting some of their water before it gets to them. And so working those relationships and making sure that we have the doors open for communication is very, very important. Obviously, we have to make sure that the governor, as kind of the final stopgap, will not allow urban Arizona to steal the water from rural Arizona. And we have to also have a governor that will stand up to the federal government on forest management and other things related to our natural resources to make sure that we're doing things in our forests that allow our creeks and streams and rivers to flow, instead of not managing our forests well enough so you have 300 or 400 or 500 trees per acre that it can't sustain. But I think one of the biggest ones is maintaining those relationships between all of Arizona and sitting people down to solve those issues, which we can solve if we stay at the table working together.
Thank you. We are getting our first question from the audience. We have some more, but if you've got any additional questions, please submit those to us. In regards to education, what is your opinion with regard to the University of Arizona Extension funding and development of the School of Veterinary Medicine? Ms. Jones, we'll start with you.
Well, actually, I had a little bit of an inside scoop on this from the Farm Bureau guys from last week, so I would have to say a robust, I'm in favor of it to the people in this room. But I'm saying that a little tongue-in-cheek, but I do think that this is something that we should carefully consider, because we know, particularly as it relates to large animal and large animal care, that we have scant few resources in this state to train people to do that. And there is an immediate need, and it is something that the pipeline, according to the best estimates that I've read, say the pipeline will be filled immediately, that every seat in that school will be filled. So it strikes me as something that we should figure out how to fund. I don't know the magic wand to where, and look, I'm not a politician, I just have to tell you, I'm an accountant, right? I look at the numbers. I don't know where that money's coming from, but I really think we have to thoughtfully consider doing it, not just because the Farm Bureau told me that we should, but because we have an opportunity in the state to really become a center of veterinary training, and we should take advantage of that, because we're getting our lunch eaten by Colorado and a couple of other states on that issue.
Mr. Bennett.
I also support the School of Veterinary Medicine at the U of A. I always tried to respect the fact that there are smarter people than me when I was a Senate president or a state senator, and you have to manage $8, $9, $10 billion budget. When you hear from an institution as important as the U of A or ASU, NAU, or higher institutions of knowledge, when they say that they want to begin a program and whatever it is, it's because they've put a lot of study into it. They know that the students are ready and waiting, and I wholeheartedly support the money being included in the budget to let them move forward with something that they think is important. It's not always what 90 legislators and a governor in Phoenix can come up with as far as the good ideas to move the state forward. And so I always tried to be very respectful and appreciative and responsive when any institutions as important as the U of A came to us and said, here's a need that we have identified and we'd like to fill it in this way. I support it.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
University of Arizona is one of the great land-grant colleges in the country, and as part of its mission, it is to help support, as a land-grant college, its primary missions is to support the agriculture industry in its state. And veterinary sciences are an important part of that industry, and they're an important part of that mission. I think the only thing that I have a problem with is that this wasn't done years ago. And it seems ridiculous that we've had students from Arizona for years and years have to travel to Colorado and Oklahoma and to the Northwest because they could not find education here. It's not only the students, but having the resources within the University of Arizona to provide a support for the industry. Whenever you have a college such as that, we see what, for example, the University Medical Center has done, not only to produce doctors, but the body of research that it does and the support it gives to health sciences in general for humans, we would have that same impact in the agriculture industry. Unfortunately, you have a lot of urban legislators who think of this as getting the doctor that will take care of the poodle or the cat, which is important. I mean, pets were, what, a $56 billion industry. But what they forget is that the Land Grants College primary mission is to support the economic well-being of this state, and agriculture is so important. And these positions are so needed, and the research that comes with the veterinary college are so important to support the entire industry that it's needed. And I think I would rush toward it because I think we're late in getting there.
Thank you. Okay, our next question, I keep getting confused, so I hope I got it right. Mr. Bennett will answer our next question first, and we're going to stick with the education theme. What is your position on Common Core? What would you do would you eliminate Common Core or replace it with another program, and why?
Well, I'm going to do something that I often do, and that is use a visual aid. Chip, grab that side. Folks, this is Common Core. If you fold it out to about 5 feet high and 8 feet wide, that's Common Core. Well, that's half of it, because there's the other half. This is just reading and writing. But you know what it says on that blue spot over on page 21? You know what it says in Common Core for, right there, yeah, I'll fold this up now. You know what it says in Common Core for 4th graders in reading in Arizona? It says they should read at a 4th grade level. Well, the standards that these replaced, you know what they said for 4th graders in reading in Arizona? They should read at a 4th grade level. And I can find things on one page where we used to teach it in 3rd grade, and Common Core says move it to 2nd. So it's moving it up a little bit. I can find other things on other pages that says we used to teach it in 3rd, move it to 4th. So we're moving all this stuff around, but I have huge concerns about Common Core, that it was established primarily outside of the state, and that the state doesn't have enough control. But I think it's diverting us from the more important question, and that is, what are we going to do different in 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade classes to make sure that 68% or 78 or 88% of Arizona 4th graders can read at a 4th grade level, like it says? Because you know what the number is today? 28% of Arizona 4th graders read at a 4th grade level. And yet we've had standards on the books for 20 years that said 4th graders should read at a 4th grade level.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
I wholly support higher standards. I wholly support raising the bar. Our children, your children, deserve an excellent education system. They deserve to leave school ready for a career or college. Our system's not doing that now. I support standards that are set at the state level. I support curriculum that is devised both at the state and the local level and gives individual teachers the right to adapt to individual student needs so that they can meet these standards. The Arizona College and Career Ready program fits that. And what you're hearing is a lot of fluff and, you know, Ken, whether it's, I guess if it's 4 pages long, it's all of a sudden okay. No, we're missing the boat. These are about higher standards to get our children ready. The program we had, AIMS, was an abject failure. The reason for it is that, yes, standards have been in place, but what we did is we fell victim to the temptation to lower our testing and our measurement. And those became the de facto standards. One of the great things about whether you call it Common Core, Bob, Phil, I don't care what you call it, I want to be able to measure results. I learned one thing in business. If you don't measure things, you never improve. If you don't set standards, you never improve. If you don't compare against others who are likewise situated, you never improve. What we did with AIMS is that we had it all insular, and so we dummied down the test. So our standards became the lowest common denominator rather than holding ourselves up high. So yes, I support the efforts that the state's put forward. We were involved in setting these standards. We are making the curriculum, and that's how it should continue.
Ms. Jones.
Let me try to answer the question. No, I don't support the Common Core standards. Let me tell you why. When he retired from the military, my husband became a high school teacher. So this actually is not theoretical to us. We actually have a very good view into the grassroots level of what happens in the classroom every single day. And if you could live Common Core for even a day, let alone a year or 6 years, you may agree with this, Scott, because what happens to teachers when you enforce this kind of draconian system is the teachers can't teach kids. And we have a saying in our house, we think we should teach kids, not teach tests. But importantly, a bureaucrat who sits 2,500 miles away in Washington, D.C., or wherever, should not be making standards for our kids here in Arizona. These people have never even set foot in an Arizona classroom. You know, as parents, as teachers, as administrators, children are individuals, and they require standards. Absolutely. I am very much in favor of standards for schools, and for teachers, and for students, and slightly more controversial, for parents, because parents have to be involved in this. But we need to make these standards in state, and they need to be applied at a local level so that every child has the opportunity I had, which is to be educated and to strive and to achieve and to graduate from high school and, gasp, actually know something.
Can I have another few seconds?
Sure. Yeah, you have 30-second rebuttal.
Yeah, I think one thing that's important is that I agree the state should set the standards, and we were part of this process. As a matter of fact, last year, legislation to implement Common Core passed unanimously in the Senate. I don't know what happened in the last year. Apparently, the discussion went off the board. But here's the challenge we have. Our children don't graduate and only compete in Arizona. They compete in a global economy. They compete against others who are raising the bar. And I refuse to send my children and your children out into the world with a substandard education. I refuse to allow them to anything less than absolute excellence in education. They deserve that. They deserve that opportunity.
Mr. Bennett, did you have anything to respond?
Well, I guess I would, I think we've got some great teachers in Arizona. And one of the things we need to do is we need to get more money to our teachers. We need to get more money in the classroom. This is an area where we fall several percentage points below the national average as far as the percentage of our education dollars that get in the classroom. If you look at all kinds of statistics that come out every year on each state, the only area in which Arizona is above the national average, in fact, we're in the top 20, is the achievement gains our students have had between 2003 and 2013. So we are moving in the right direction. I don't want to get that off track by getting all wrapped around the axle on what the standard is itself.
Ms. Jones, do you have anything to add?
You know, I don't want to pick a fight on this. I just think that it's something that you should look at as a practical matter and not as a theoretical concept. I don't think anybody felt the pain of needing standards to be comparable more than GoDaddy did. As we were growing to 4,000 people, we completely gutted the technology specialists in this state. We hired every single one of them. And then we had to start going out of state. I get that we have to have something to compare, but I also know we've lived on many Air Force bases. Children are malleable. They are capable of moving from state to state and getting into different school systems. So let's talk about this as a practical matter and acknowledge this for what it is, something that needs cooperation and leadership to solve, and not just throw it up and say, oh, we have to have standards and they have to be comparable, and not offer any solutions.
Okay, thank you. Our next question changes topic a little bit. We're going to talk about taxes, our favorite subject to all of us, I know. It's almost April 15th. A few weeks ago in the Prescott Courier newspaper, there was a story regarding taxes, specifically state sales taxes versus property taxes. Please explain your position on this matter, and how will Arizona compete for new business with this standard? So, Mr. Scott, or Mr. Smith, it's your turn to begin.
Well, I can't comment. I didn't read the article, but I will tell you that Arizona, and one of the first things I'll do as governor, is really to look at the package as a whole. What we've done in Arizona is we've piecemealed it. And basically about 20 years ago, we phased out property tax at the state level for all intents and purposes. And so, whereas most states, many states, not most, but many, well, most, I guess, have a three-legged stool, we really have a two-legged stool between sales taxes and income taxes at a state level. Now, local levels, you go a lot more into property tax and otherwise. I think we need to review the entire package that we have and see how we are competitive. There's some areas where we're very competitive. There's other areas that we're not competitive. But rather than take a piecemeal approach, one of the first things I would do is appoint a chief competitiveness officer, who is somebody from outside of government, someone who's a retired CEO or someone who would come in and look at us as the package and review our entire financial system. We have a taxing system in Arizona that was really developed pre and, for the most part, post-World War II. The world's changed a little bit. The world of commerce has changed a little bit, and our tax system has not kept up with these changes. And therefore, to ask whether we're competitive or not, yeah, in some areas we are, in some areas we're not. Rather than piecemeal it and say, well, income tax is bad, we have to look at this, because we actually are fairly competitive in that, but I know we can do better. Property taxes, well, we're at a state level, we're very competitive because we have zero. But in other areas, we're not competitive. And I would look at the whole package and try and find something that's fair, that's reasonable, that's fair for you, for business, and that's what inspires business to invest.
Thank you. Ms. Jones.
I apologize, I didn't see the article, but if I could just say generally, if the question is to sales tax versus property tax, as a conservative, this notion of taxing property kind of offends me, just generally speaking. So I would shy away generally from that, just as a high-level fundamental notion. But I also know that we spend money in this state, and we have expenses, and we have to sometimes look at this as if it were a real live budget, like you would in a business. Because we know that there are two sides to every income statement. There are the expenses and there are the revenues. And so if you're going to take away revenue from a source, you only have two choices. You either have to replace it with something or you have to reduce spending. I mean, that's kind of your two choices. I really like, and I have been noodling on this notion of reducing the income tax and trying to replace it with something that's more predictable, because in our state we have fluctuations up to 30% of the income tax, and such a huge proportion of our income tax relies on high-dollar wage earners that it's very unpredictable. So I actually like lowering that and taking up the slack in a low-based sales tax. So as between the two, I kind of come down on the side of the sales tax, but I haven't worked out all the numbers yet. Just being candid, that's just what I do. But as between sales and property, I have to come down on the side of sales because in my mind, it's a pay-to-play sort of system where if you buy it, you pay for it, and if you don't, you don't.
Mr. Bennett.
Well, I would associate my remarks with Christine in the sense that if the article was about sales versus property, I come down on sales taxes. I think, of course, the only fair tax is the tax that somebody else pays, that you don't. But I favor taxes on consumption so that as people buy things, they pay a low-rate, broad-based tax, and then their tax burden is directly proportional to their standard of living. Somebody living on $30,000 is going to pay a third of somebody who's living and spending $90,000 a year. So between property and sales, I come down on sales. But I actually believe that it's very important for Arizona to eliminate the state income tax. I was speaking at a a thing in Chandler a couple years ago, and it was on economic development. And one of the kind of gurus in Arizona on economic development talked about how his organization been trying to attract 300 companies in just 1 year, a couple years ago, that had left California, and they were trying to get it to come to them to come to Arizona. And then he finally admitted that of the 300 companies they had been working on for a whole year, only one of the 300 came to Arizona. And the audience said, well, where'd they go? And he started naming off about 9 or 10 states, and 6 of them were states that do not have a state income tax. There's 9 of the 50 states that do not have a state income tax, and I think Arizona needs to be the 10th. And when 300 companies in 1 year leave California, we should be getting 70 or 80 or 90 of them, not one. Now, you got to work through all the issues of how do you restructure your total tax policy. It's a package, as Scott says, but I think it's time to get rid of the state income tax.
Okay, thank you.
We will, if I could,
Go
we will
ahead.
say one thing though. The same person who talked about those will tell you that in follow-up interviews, not a single company who didn't come to Arizona mentioned some of the tax situation as being the reason they didn't come here. They talked about other things. They talked about education. They talked about quality of life. There's a lot of reasons that companies choose to invest in your state. Taxes, you've got to be there with taxes. I'm a low tax guy. I was CPA for almost 30 years. I spent my life helping people lower their taxes, and I've seen some pretty ridiculous taxes. But we have to look at the whole package. We have to look at who we are as a state. That's what will inspire investment.
Anything else?
Well, I didn't say that was the only thing. And it's, I know of another company that just moved from Illinois. They were looking at 2 places, Florida and Arizona. And the fact that Florida didn't have an income tax and Arizona did played a huge decision in the fact that that company with 1,000 jobs averaging 100,000 each is going to be in Florida, not Arizona. No, it's not the only thing. I think the close second is your education system. You have to convince companies that we can produce students that can help make their company successful. So it's taxes, education, and a few others actually, but my time's up.
All right. Well, with that, we will change topics again. We'd like to go to border security. We are extremely concerned about our porous borders. State your position on border security. Specifically discuss how to solve our new one-way tickets in quotation marks. So, Ms. Jones, you're going to start on this one.
I wish I would have come up with that one-way ticket in. I don't think any immigration discussion is really worth having unless we can secure the border. And this is another area where I did not have any expertise, and I've really been trying to educate myself on what is going on down there, because it strikes me that we have a lot of sensationalizing and a lot of rhetoric that's going on here. So a couple of things have become clear to me. One is there is this notion of the one-way ticket. The border with California is pretty good. The border with Texas is pretty good. Even into the Yuma sector, it's pretty secure. Most of the illegal immigration is being filtered right into the Tucson sector, which was a little shocking. The converse, which is also true, is almost more offensive to me, and that is commercial traffic that we actually want to come across the border is being stopped at the Tucson sector. And even if you go to the port of entry at Nogales, as the Farm Bureau, you ought to be significantly offended by this notion. There are 25-kilometer lines of trucks waiting to get across the border. This is real live commerce. So 2 things happen. We bear all of the burden in Arizona of the cost of illegal immigration, and we get none of the benefit of the economic advantage that good commercial traffic provides. So it strikes me we have to create a secure border. What sets me apart from the other candidates? We all spin rhetoric on immigration. I spent 11 years growing a technology company. There are readily available technologies today that we can put in place that will help us know who's coming and going. But friends, let's agree, this is more than just men and women walking across the border, okay, a line on a map. This has economic and educational and homeland security and citizenship ramifications. This is a big deal. It is a national security issue, and we have to take it seriously. The federal government's not going to do it. If they wanted to do it, they would have done it decades ago. Arizona is going to have to lead the way on this. I'll take my 30 seconds when we come back.
Ken.
We must secure the border. And I think the principles, I do not support amnesty. I believe the principles of being good neighbors between countries are the same principles as being good neighbors on the street. A lot of people have fences or walls between their property. Usually you put up a fence to keep your kids and their toys in your own side. But when a neighbor wants to visit a neighbor, they call ahead, they show up at the front door, you meet them at the front door and welcome them in, you watch TV or have dinner or play games or whatever you do, and then they go back out the front door and they go home. A good neighbor doesn't hop your fence, break into your garage, and live out of the freezer. So we have to secure the border, but we are a nation of immigrants. And if people want to come into our country to work or be educated or whatever it is, then you come in the front door. And when you do so, you tell us who you are, how long you're going to stay, where you're going to be, you follow our laws, pay the taxes, and then you go home when you're supposed to go home. For those that are here illegal, we have to find a mechanism to help them get square with the law. That does not mean, though, amnesty or you cut in front of the line of other people who have been waiting to do it the right way. And the last thing I'll say is the importance of having a governor from rural Arizona. The legislature appropriated about $2.5 or $3 million a couple years ago for the border counties, primarily to help the sheriffs who are saying, if you give us a little bit of money, we could fill in some of the gaps where the Border Patrol is not doing a good job. But the whole negotiation process that ensued at the Capitol ended up deciding that how do we give it to 4 rural counties and not to anybody else? And so they decided to split the money between all 15 counties equally based on population. So who got all the money? Maricopa County. If I'm your governor and we're going to identify money to help solve the border problem, it's going to go to rural Arizona to solve the border problem, not be 60% given to Maricopa County.
There's no doubt our immigration system is broken. I mean, it's failed. It's failed us because we don't know who's coming across the border. We don't know who's in here. And the problem is that we fail to keep the people we don't want in out, and we fail to bring the people we need in. You know, Canada, which is about the size, actually it's smaller population-wise than the state of California, brought in more PhDs, high-level entrepreneurs and investors last year than the entire United States. We have huge issues. As a mayor, I live immigration every day because Mesa is a large percentage Hispanic, and there's no doubt that a large percentage of those are probably undocumented. I deal with the challenges, but I also deal with the lack of opportunities that not having a system that works brings. There's no doubt that whether you call it securing the border, and if someone can really explain to me what it means to secure the border, I like to say control the border. I want to know who's coming in and who's not coming in, and who I want to keep out. I want to bring, and you have to recognize human nature, which is, I've lived in Arizona my whole life, and there was always a free flow of labor and other things that came in and went back, to fill the needs of agriculture and other industries that were seasonal. We need to develop a system. Whether you call it guest worker or something, there needs to be a legitimate way that takes pressure off so that people will come in the right way and then go home, so we can concentrate our efforts as we do secure or control that border on those people we don't want in. We also have to fix and recognize that almost half the people that are here illegally came in under legal visas, and that we have no system to track where they are. Those have got to be part of the fixes.
Anybody want a rebuttal?
Yeah. Can I take the extra 30 seconds?
Yes.
Okay, so the second part of it is we have to give people the ability to get to work. We have plenty of people who want to work. We have to give them a way to do it legally. Look, simply put, if you want to be an American, you are welcome here, but you must do it our way. We have a path to citizenship. If you want to get on it, we want you here. You are part of our fabric. We are built on immigration. But if you don't care about citizenship, and many workers don't, we have to give those people a way to work and to do it legally without regard to the citizenship piece, but to put people back to work to stimulate the economic growth, not just in farming, not just in agriculture, but in so many different contexts in our community, in our economy.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. We will go to our next question, which is about EPA. how will you protect Arizona from federal regulatory overreach, especially with environmental regulations? So it's all federal regulatory overreach and especially environmental regulations. Mr. Bennett, would you like to begin?
First of all, we need to do a good job, a great job in our state agencies, Department of Environmental Quality, which the EPA has basically said, as long as you guys take care of business in your own state, we'll be hands off. Now, they break that every so often when they want to, but we need to do a good job, a great job at taking care of our own environment in Arizona, and then we frankly need to first politely and then more forcefully if necessary, invite the federal government to stay the heck out of the way and get out of Arizona, because nobody's going to take care of Arizona better than Arizonans. And once we prove that we can do that with our state agencies, then I think we need to stand up where we have to. I'm going to give you an example that's not related to the environment specifically, but as Secretary of State, I'm the chief elections official. The voters of Arizona 10 years ago said that when people register to vote, they should prove citizenship in order to get registered to vote. Well, other groups said, that's terrible, and they fought it all the way to the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, we lost, and they told us to go to a federal commission to see if they would change the federal registration form. When they didn't, we had to take the federal government to court. And fortunately, we got a decision out of the 10th Circuit in Kansas, or the Federal District Court in Kansas just a week and a half ago, where we got the federal government, we got a federal judge to tell the federal government, get out of Arizona's way and let Arizona do things the way that they want. And we can do the same related to environmental issues as well.
Mr. Smith.
The reality is environmental law was created by the federal government, and the courts have held for a long time the federal government is the primary one. So what do you do? Well, first of all, you have to figure out a way to work with these people, and working through state agencies. We do a pretty good job, but sometimes when it comes down to, for example, stormwater, clean water, and other things, the EPA oversteps their bounds. And you need someone who's walked those halls. As president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, I got very involved with the EPA. I've known the last two administrators on a personal basis. Lisa Jackson, who was completely political, and did nothing that wasn't political. And then Gina McCarthy, who actually is a very, very good person, but is following political leads and political direction. But we worked through these. I was very instrumental in working directly with EPA in Washington to solve a dust problem in Maricopa County, and to get acceptance of our dust plan in Maricopa County. I know what it's like to deal with these. I've worked with the IRS. I've worked with the EPA. Through my service back there, I know people at the top levels of the agency. That doesn't end the regulation. That just makes it hopefully more rational. The other thing is, when you can't get it, you go straight to the source. I was in the White House, in the Roosevelt Room, and President Obama asked me straight to my face, what can we do to create more jobs, Scott? And I said, President, you got to get the EPA off our backs. You got to get regulation off our backs. Over-regulation absolutely kills jobs, it kills projects, and if you want to create jobs, you have to get the EPA off. I'll go straight to the White House if I have to state the case that over-regulation, especially by the EPA, kills jobs and kills economic prosperity.
Go ahead.
I started out tonight saying that I'm a fierce defender of the Constitution, and I can only tell you how I would deal with the EPA by telling you what I've done in the past, and that is, I've read the Constitution and I know what it says, and among the people who want to be your next governor, I'm aware of only myself that has actually stood up for that for you. And so that's the way I approach this with respect to federal agencies. When the NSA came to me, and you guys are familiar with Edward Snowden, and you're familiar with the PRISM program, when the NSA came to GoDaddy and said, hey, Christine, we'd like for you to put our box in your data center, and we'd like for you to give us access to 1/3 of the traffic on the internet that you control, my answer to them is the same as my answer would be to the EPA and to the EOC and to the DEA and so many of the other worthless federal agencies. The answer would be no. Just no. Sometimes you have to stand on principle, because even when it's a really hard balance, and believe me, between national security and between privacy, this is a hard decision that needs a serious person to make. None of us want another 9/11. I wanted to help them catch bad guys. And believe me, we did help them catch lots of bad guys. We affirmatively helped prevent terrorist attacks in this country, but not if it violated the Constitution, not if it violated your rights, not if it spied on law-abiding citizens, not on my watch. So as your governor, sometimes my answer to the EPA or to any of these federal agencies just has to be no, just no. Not today, not to violate our Constitution. We are going to stand up for those rights, and we are going to own the 10th Amendment, and we're going to take back the things that are not the enumerated powers, and we are going to own those, because we're the state, and those are our rights, and we're going to take them back.
Any rebuttals?
No, but I think we ought to give a shout out to Senator Al Melvin, who, if he were here tonight, he would be telling you to go to a website called American Lands Council.org. And frankly, I think a lot of us agree with him. I do. And that is, the federal government needs to turn over their lands that they're holding on to in Arizona and most of the western states. If you draw that imaginary line, as Al will talk about, between the Dakotas and Texas and look at all the eastern states, it's 2, 3, 4% owned by the federal government. But in the West, it can almost be reversed. I think Nevada has 2% private land. In Arizona, we're at about 13. But we need to invite and then demand that the federal government needs to divest itself of its huge holdings in Arizona and the rest of the western states. And I'll push for that as your next governor. Who would what?
Who would profit was the question.
Well, you would begin a process of allowing those to begin to be bought into private ownership. And frankly, I think that the lands that they've held on in Arizona and other western states really should inure to the benefit of Arizona. The federal government had no business holding on to all the lands that they've held on in most of the western states. And so the state would profit. As people buy those lands into the private sector, the dollars would go to the state.
If I could, I agree. I think we got screwed when we took statehood. I mean, the federal government violated their own law by keeping the lands that they had, and that's why you have that line drawn. They decided in the western states, hey, we made a mistake, and we're going to keep all these lands. I would love to secure the border, but I think promises that the state is going to somehow take this over are hollow. Here's the reality. The reality is, as a mayor, you deal with reality. You deal with what you can govern. You go fight the EPA, you do. But the reality is, we can barely manage the 9.2 million acres of state lands we have now because we are unwilling to give the resources to our land departments to do that. So how in the world could we as a state take on federal lands unless we're willing to provide the resources? We talk about securing the border, and yet we do not have the resources to do what needs to be done. You need to, if you're going to lead, you need to not just throw things out there. You need to, and just say, let's do this. You need to deal with the reality of how can we possibly handle these. And if this state is willing to put forth the resources to do this, I'm all for it. Other than that, it's empty rhetoric. Unless you're willing to spend the money and offer the resources, either shift from one area to the other to do things like manage lands, to do things like truly take over the role of the federal government, they're empty promises, and that's not leadership.
I actually couldn't agree with you more. That's why at GoDaddy we spent hundreds of millions of dollars to build infrastructure to protect the privacy of law-abiding citizens. It was Google and Yahoo and Facebook and Microsoft and Apple and Skype and YouTube and 9 major internet companies that did exactly what Mayor Smith just described. They just spun rhetoric. We actually put our money where our mouth was. This is not a concept. This is not a theory to me. This is actual real live work in action. There is a difference between rhetoric and actually doing something. This is something that I've actually done, and it worked. And I, you know what? I would just say, you're welcome. At least on that piece.
With your permission, we'll have one more question, then we can do our closing arguments. It's not a courtroom, is it? Closing statements.
Well, there are a couple lawyers up here. So.
Woo!
I'd like to address the defendant, please. Wait, who's the plaintiff and who's the defendant?
Well, thankfully, I'm not on trial today, so let's try this.
Well, you are now. I mean,
Exactly. Ken's going to be the judge.
Today, it is difficult for the public to trust some politicians. What is the basis of your moral compass on the issues that you will decide as governor? Mr. Smith.
I was in business for 25, 30 years. Never desired to be hold political office. Matter of fact, the first term I was mayor, and I ran for mayor. It's my first political office. I disdained anyone calling me a politician. I realized, you know what? I am. I'm here for public service. I can tell you all day long how I govern, but I say, well, look and see what I've done. Go to my city that I've governed now for 6 years, and look and see how we've followed conservative principles, how we've expanded freedoms, how we've reduced regulations, and how we've fiscally managed our city. Those are the values that I grew up with. Those are the values that were established. Those are the values I implemented as I governed. I intend to do the same thing as governor. I'm not telling you what I think I might perhaps do. I'm telling you, go look at what I've done. Go look what I've done as the CEO of the 38th largest city in the country. And judge me on that. Judge me on that. They're based on very sound, common sense principles. As a mayor, you can't be part of a debate society. You can't sit there and say, promise this and promise that. You know, one of the great things of being a mayor is that you've got to deliver. And you deal with reality. You deal with resource limitations. You deal with the political realities. But at the end of the day, you have to deliver. And that should be based on principles, and that's what I have done for 6 years. Please, go look and see what we've done. Let you judge for yourself. Those are my principles and my values.
Ms. Jones?
If the question was, what is the basis of your moral compass, and I think that was the question, I would tell it to you in the form of a story. In 1972, my brother was walking home from school, and a nice gentleman came up to him and asked him if he wanted to go to Sunday school. And he didn't know what that was, so the guy said, well, I'll tell you what, if you come to Sunday school 5 Sundays in a row, we'll give you a free radio. He said, okay. So the Sunday school bus showed up that next day, and for 5 weeks he went to Sunday school, and on the 5th Sunday he come home, sure enough, he had a radio. My other brother looked at that, and he said, well, where's my radio? So he went 5 straight Sundays, and he came back, and he had a radio, and I was the youngest kid's sister, and I said, hold on a second. Where is my radio? And my mom, who happens to be here tonight, God love her, said, you know what, honey, you're too small to get on the bus. You can go to Sunday school as soon as you're big enough to climb onto the bus. Well, eventually I became big enough and I climbed onto the bus, and that's how my brothers and I got involved in Denver First Church of the Nazarene. That is where my moral compass comes from, because since the time I was 3 years old, I have grown up in the environment of a church of evangelical Christians who have a Wesleyan holiness tradition. And my moral compass comes from my relationship with God Almighty, the creator of the universe, and I am not apologetic about it. I do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, and that is why I do it. Because sometimes in your life you have to focus on what's right and not to apologize and not to make excuses and not to politicize and not to fight for the sake of the fight, but just drive the point based on the morality that you get from a founding knowing Jesus as your Savior.
Well, the basis of my moral compass came from 3 places. First, it came from my parents and my family. And I was raised Christian, still am. And I went to Sunday school for 54 years, and I never got a radio. What's this?
I know. Yeah, and I went and I never got the radio either, Mom. I'm still holding a grudge against that.
But it was my family, it was our church that we attended, and then, as I mentioned earlier, the Boy Scouts. Those words were meaningful to say trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. And just think through those 12 principles. If we have a governor that has those 12 principles, we can transform Arizona into a state where we love to be here. You can raise your family, you can have a good job and run a business. And I think Scott makes an excellent point too. For those of us that have had public office, look at our record. I've served in positions in government for 25 years and in the private sector for 30 years. And my public sector was not a career. I did 4 years on the city council because I wanted to help make Prescott better, my hometown. And then I went back all the time. I was also working in the private sector. Then our kids were in the school system. I volunteered to be on the State Board of Education, did that for 7 years. All the time, also working in the private sector. Then I got interested in statewide issues, state legislature 8 years, and back. And so look at the record, because what a person will do tomorrow is usually based on what they did yesterday.
I got to take 30 seconds because they're telling stories now. I didn't get a radio either. You know, when I was at Price Waterhouse as an auditor, one of our clients was the Red River Ranches down in Stanfield, and that was a ranch that John Wayne owned, and Lewis Johnson was their owner. And we were auditing one time, and they had you know, a huge feedlot, and they had this breeding herd, and they had these bulls. And we were auditing the sale of a bull. And on this, and this was back in like 1983, 84, and the bull sold for like $275,000, and the documentation was literally a napkin, which is, I, Lewis Johnson, sell this to you, Bob, for $275,000, boom. And the auditors went crazy. And they said, how can you, $275,000, where's the 10-page contract signed by 4 lawyers and everything? And I talked to my grandmother, you know, the wife of a farmer and a rancher, and she just laughed. She goes, you know, the city boys don't get it, do they? I said, no, they don't, Grandma. You know, she goes, I'm surprised there was a napkin. There was probably only a napkin because they told Louis he had to have it documented. Because he said, you know, how are usually those deals consummated? With a handshake. And people know that if you're not good for your word, you don't go anywhere in this life. And isn't it sad that we've lost that? One of the big things I've done as a city of Mesa is to fight our lawyers into over-lawyering, because there's basic values and basic decencies that don't need 40-page contracts to document. That's where I learned my values, from a family and a church and scouts that taught me the value of a handshake, and that was golden. You know, you don't forget those lessons. You do not forget what it was like to sell a $275,000 bull. And the big question was, well, what happens if the bull is sterile? And Lewis said, he said, well, what if it doesn't produce? And Lewis said, well, the guy sends the bull back and I give him his money back. And the auditor was incredulous. He says, you'd do that? He says, well, of course I would. That's the honest thing to do. That's how I govern. That's how I base my life.
Anyone else? Okay, with that, we will go ahead and ask you to provide a 2-minute closing statement, and we'll start with Ms. Jones.
Thank you, and thanks again for being here and for caring enough about Arizona and particularly your local community to come out on a night when you could be doing so many other things. As I travel around the state, the single most common question people ask me is, why would anybody want to run for office in this political climate? And you know, the uniform of leadership is comfortable to me. I've done it a lot in a lot of different contexts, but I've never run for office before. This political thing is new to me. And I get that it's tough. I understand it's a tough game, and now I'm up on television, and I've squarely planted the target on my back for all of you nice folks to take shots at me. And I get it. I get it that it's tough. But I also know that I come to this with no strings attached. I don't owe anybody anything. And it's very liberating, it's very freeing to be here to just hear from you, to look you in the eye and to understand what's in your heart and what's in your mind. And I think, based on feedback I've gotten around the state, that maybe for this time and this place in Arizona's history, that a practiced politician is not what we need. Maybe it's time for us to come at this with untethered ideas. I am Christine Jones. I'm running for governor. I would love your support. I'd also love for you to go to ChristineJones.com and hear more about some of the substantive issues that we did not get to talk about tonight, to follow us on Facebook, Jones for Governor, to follow me on Twitter, where I tweet myself, which really drives my campaign staff crazy, Jones for Gov. But importantly, when you decide who you're going to vote for, and I beg you to vote, I ask that you do it with honesty and integrity, and with a notion of picking the person you think will be the finest governor for this state. Because I believe together we can make Arizona, among the grand galaxy of states in these United States, the brightest star in the union. Thank you.
I think a governor needs 3 very important things. One, they need integrity. I think they need experience. And I think they need vision. And you tell whether someone has those by what they've done in the past. Now, something inside me wonders if, you know, Christine's talking about me when she talks about practiced politicians. I don't consider myself a practiced politician. I screw up every day. And I make, you know, I've made some real bonehead decisions. But you know, my 2-year-old grandson had some surgery about 2 weeks ago. And you know what his parents, what the first question in their mind was for the doctor that was going to perform the surgery? It was, how many times have you performed this surgery? And having a balance of experience and private sector experience and local government experience and state government experience, those three come together in a very important way to make sure that somebody who's going to try to do something tomorrow, and working with 90 legislators is not an easy task. You know, we've all been CEOs of companies. And when you're the CEO of a company, you get to say, we're doing ABC. And everybody in the company does ABC, or they find a job with a different company. But as Scott, with 7 members on the city council, or I, when I was one member of 90 in the legislature, said, I want to do ABC, there were 89 other legislators that said, well, I want to do XYZ and JKL and NOP and on and on and on. And making all of those come together and working across party lines and building relationships and keeping your word and talking to a legislator for just a few seconds in the hallway and shaking their hands and saying, yeah, I'll support that bill. I don't owe anybody anything either. I never voted for a bill because I asked them to vote for mine because I'd vote for theirs. That never happened in the 8 years I was in the legislature. But you need experience and that private sector understanding to make the state move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
I ran for mayor after 30 years in business because I saw that my city lacked leadership and there was a vacuum, and they fell into a trap. They accepted average. They decided that good was good enough, and good isn't good enough if we're going to build a great state. I went in with my eyes wide open, and in 6 years I can tell you I've learned a lot. I'm a much better leader today than I was 6 years ago. I don't know, maybe it's being elected as president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors by my peers. Great honor I've had, the majority of which, by the way, are Democrats. And it wasn't because I agreed with them politically, it's because they trusted my leadership. This is the ultimate job interview, if you really think about it. This isn't really a campaign. We are applying to be your CEO, and you're the hiring committee. What do you do when you hire someone, a manager in your company or a caretaker or whatever it is you look at that resume. You look and see what they've done. But you don't just take the resume, you see how that fits in with where you want to go. You look and see, has that person shown that they can lead their place to a different level? I would ask you to do 2 things. First of all, look at my resume. CPA, attorney, MBA, business experience CEO of a government unit, the only candidate who's actually led a government entity, president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Do 2 things. Number 1, go talk to somebody in Mesa, my constituency. Ask them something which is sort of a twist on the presidential race. Ask them, are you better off today? Is my city better off today than it was when Mayor Smith took office? Ask them. Ask anyone in Mesa. Second thing is, ask people who have worked with me, for me, and beside me of what they think of what it was like being with Mayor Scott Smith or President Scott Smith or CPA attorney Scott Smith. Those are my references. I'm confident that if you talk to those people, if you ask them, they'll tell you the true story. They'll tell you what it's like. They'll tell you what it's like to truly build a better Arizona, because that's what we've done in my community. That's what we'll do for this state. Thank you very much.
Well,
by the way, votescottsmith.com.
You got to get that right in there.
Votescottsmith.com. That's what I wanted to get in.
I'd like to give a round of applause for our candidates. Also for the town of Cottonwood, for the Chamber of Commerce for providing this beautiful facility for us and our refreshments for now. And then also would like to invite you to come and meet our candidates one-on-one and spend some time with them. They're going to be here for a few minutes. I hope to wrangle them for a little bit here. But we have the building for about another 10, 15 minutes, and we'd love to have you hang out and visit a little bit. So thank you all. We appreciate you coming, and hope you enjoyed your evening. Thank you.